Good evening, everyone. I'm sorry for the slight delay. We've just gone live with the meeting. My name is Luciane Bauker from Democratic Services, and I'm going to start the meeting tonight by asking the committee to put forward nominations for chair for the next municipal year.
May I propose Beth as the chair for the committee, please?
Do you have a seconder? Are there any other nominations? Okay. Could the committee please vote in favor, all those in favor for Beth? Unanimous. Okay. Beth, over to you.
I'd like to now ask for nominations for vice chair, please. Can I nominate from the chair? I'd like to nominate Rob Cumber, please.
I'm happy to second that.
So, oh, sorry, can we put it to the vote? Can you vote for or against, please? For. Thank you, that's unanimous. Any apologies for absence? We've got Pauline online, so I think we're all present. Minutes of the previous meeting, which are on page 8 of your agenda. It seems like a whole lifetime ago. Sorry, pages 5 to 8. Are there any? Rachel?
Thanks, Chair. I just had a very brief correction and also a question, if that's okay. So the correction, bottom of page 6, it should read trucks rather than tucks. But more interestingly, the minutes mention the Get Me Home Safe provisions that we agreed some time ago. And I was just wondering, whether we've had any applications since the policy was changed where those provisions had to be included, and if so, how that's been working, if that's okay.
I think we're only just in receipt of an application now, but until the one that we've just received recently, we've not.
Are you happy that I sign the minutes off as a correct record of the meeting? Thank you very much. Are there any declarations of interest? Nope. We've got no public questions unless we've had any in very recently. No? Are there any member questions? No? Item 8, fees and charges for licensable activities. Kieran, this is yours.
Thank you, Chair. This paper sets out the fees and charges proposed for licensable activities in 2025 to 26. The summary of the report is that it's necessary that discretionary fees are increased by 5%, rounded up to the nearest pound for clarity, to maintain the cost of the operational administration involved as a licensing authority. We've recommended adjustment to the rescore revisits for food hygiene rating inspections at £200, and a utilisation of the maximum statutory limits available for environmental crimes such as fly tipping, presently set at £400. This is to usher in a variable enforcement model starting at £500, fixed penalty rising to £1,000, dependent upon the severity of the offence. I'm joined in support today with Gina Frost, the ASB Service Manager, as well, if we have any questions on environmental crime later in this report. The proposed adjustments support the financial stability of the Council's licensing functions, and they reinforce environmental crime deterrence through structured severity-based penalties. In terms of background to fee setting, licensing authorities are required to review their fees and charges on an annual basis. A significant number of the fees available within the licensing field, they're actually set by government statute or regulation. Therefore, they cannot be changed by the Council. These are statutory fees. So they're set out in Appendix A. The fees that are set out in Appendix B, these fees are within the Council's discretion to set. They're the discretionary fees. and they're based on an assessment of the cost of administering the service, including the general management of processing of applications, IT infrastructure, office costs, finance, legal support, democratic services and the enforcement of the regulatory function. The analysis of issues. Income from licensing fees should be no more than the cost of maintaining the licensing service. The service should be cost neutral, with fees balancing out over a 5-year period. The Council itself has faced considerable challenging cost increases in recent years, of which we're all well aware. In the last 2 years, licensing fees have increased at around 10% for 2023 to 24 and at 6% for 2024 to 25. In line with the Council's proposed fees and charges for 2025 to 26, and in order to cover the increasing operational costs, it is recommended for this year that a 5% increase to discretionary fees is necessary. This is a measure to ensure the administrative management enforcement of licensing regimes, including any supported licensing related crime reduction initiatives, are adequately covered. In previous reports to committee, we've seen that the total licensing expenditure was anticipated to be 430k. The budgeted income from licensing fees for 2023 to 24 was projected at 368k, and the actual income during that period was 333k. And for 2024 to 25, the budget was increased to 398k, and the latest forecast anticipates that the budgeted level of income will be achieved. Income sustained from licensing fees endeavour to offset the costs to the Council of administering the actual service. The work is currently being undertaken to establish the exact cost of the licensing service to allow greater clarity to aid fee setting in future years. This paper demonstrates the inclusion of benchmarking to maintain that Wokingham remains consistent with fee setting across neighbouring authorities. What we want to see is a proportionate and necessary increase, but not an increase that blasts Wokingham out of context and out of the water. A 5% increase in fees is recommended as part of the Council's corporate approach to budget setting for the 2025 fiscal year. It is maintained that any shortfalls or excesses should be balanced out over a 5-year period. The Council, once again, has no power to increase fees set by statute in Appendix A. It's only the discretionary fees in Appendix B. In terms of environmental protection, it's also recommended to utilise the maximum fine available for environmental crimes. The fixed penalty for a fly tipping offence is currently £400. It is proposed that officers will now utilise a sliding scale, so when considering the severity of an offence. This will range from £500 at the minimum to £750 to £1,000 dependent on factors around that offence, and that will be through officer discretion. It is also recommended to set the food hygiene rescore visit to £200, aligning with fees set by neighbouring authorities. That provides fairness and consistency within the region. The fee covers the operational expense and on-costs of an environmental health officer carrying out an inspection following a low score for a business, and that supports the overall service goal of cost neutrality. In terms of food hygiene rescore visits, neighbouring authorities are currently charging £350 at Windsor and Maidenhead, £227 at Reading and £213 at Slough. Benchmarking is included in this report for a number of local authorities that are neighbouring authorities, and we can see in terms of the figures that have been taken out, there's an average fee set, and Wokingham is relatively close or under the average fee. So it appears to be the case that we are aligned with other neighbouring authorities in terms of our fee setting. The recommendation, the proposed adjustments support the financial stability of the Council's functions as a licensing authority. Some of the changes reinforce environmental crime deterrence through structured severity-based penalties, alongside adequate fee setting to cover the operational costs of an environmental health officer inspection following the need to reassess a business with a low food hygiene rating. It's necessary that discretionary fees are increased by 5%, rounded up to the nearest pound for clarity, and to maintain the costs of the operational administration involved as a licensing authority. We turn to the front page of the report. Members are asked to note the fees set out in Appendix A and Appendix B, as part of the council's fee setting process, and to recommend these amendments to executive in this paper with the discretionary fees that are set. I'm happy to take any questions, and once again we've got Gina Frost with us as well from our ASB service that handle the fly tipping offences if there's any questions in that regard too.
Rachel.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the introduction. I just had a couple of questions, if that's okay. First is to get a bit more assurance on the 5% and assurance that that's absolutely necessary, bearing in mind current inflation is 1.7%. The projections on inflation, I know they're just projections, but they're expected to remain sort of below 2% or below for this next several years. Last year at this point we used CPI as our inflating figure, and so we didn't add any more to that at this point last year. So a bit more detail would be useful on how you got to that 5%. Is it just because that's the general budget assumption for the council for next year, or has any more thought gone into the kind of types of costs that we're covering in terms of presumably mostly it's staff costs, and whether that 5% is appropriate? So first one is about getting a bit more detail on how you got to that 5%, given the current inflation is much lower than that.
Thank you. So the 5% does align with the corporate approach to fee setting in terms of the council, the council's budget for the next year. What we've seen in terms of the fees, in terms of the analysis of the issues, what brings out the need to increase around at 5%, it brings out the actual income. So where we're looking at the projections, so in the report at 2.4 and 2.5, we're looking at the actual income that's been received. You'll be familiar with how previously we did not necessarily have a surefire figure of the amount of income that we'd receive from fees and charges with the council as we moved away from the PPP, and we had to take some decisions around the fee setting at that point. We also took the decision to follow the inflation, the RPI route at that time. They appear to be appropriate decisions, reflecting back the increases at 10% and 6%, because we can see that where we were projecting those figures, they have become ever so slightly under. We're currently looking at the forecast to meet what we were expected at 398. I think this report sets out that we may benefit from we may well benefit from a significant increase in percentage for covering the costs of running this service, but that would be particularly unfair to business and trade. So where we've carried out the benchmarking exercise is to see how much local authorities are charging, our neighbours are charging, and to make sure that where we put an increase in, that we're not putting an increase that's extortionate amount, but actually is more in keeping with neighbouring authorities.
Okay, if I could just come back on that. So I think in terms of the income, I understand what you're saying about the fact that we got less income than we expected last year. I think what we're missing is the level of costs, because if we're supposed to remain cost neutral, we don't have the cost figures here, so it's quite hard to judge whether our fee setting is right in terms of how it meets with our costs. Do you have any figures on you in terms of the 333 for last year, the 398 expected for this year, how they measure up against the costs, and whether are we making surpluses or deficits? How well has that part of it been working?
So when we've looked through this with finance, in previous reports in previous reports to committee, the total licensing expenditure was set at 430k. It's quite a high figure. What we're looking at for and the fees and charges, that's effectively the income that's received. So it's not a cost. That's effectively what the council is, what's brought in from those applications. So we're starting to get a grasp in terms of the actual fees that are coming in. We have the expenditure at 430, and our finance section, along with myself, are looking at drilling down in terms of the costs of the council. when we looked at the costs, there are obviously salary costs, and that's quite simple and easy to categorise. And that brings us easily to around this £300,000 mark with just salary costs, so just the actual costs of salaries. And we found that there's a considerable cost in terms of the on costs and costs that are associated with running the service. So what we're looking for in terms of now going into next year is to try and separate some of the costs of the enforcement and safety service and keep it to just licensing, so we get a greater idea. I'm afraid that what will likely happen is that as we do that, we'll have a greater understanding of the on cost just for licensing, and it may well be the case that we'd look for increases in the future to make sure we're covering the full remit.
Okay, thanks. I would say for future reports, it would be really helpful to have a clear summary of the income and the costs as well. Thank you.
Based on a very similar question, really. So my understanding, if I understood what you just said correctly, is you're looking at current projected costs of 430k and basic income of 398 or thereabouts. So that's about 7.5%, give or take, excess costs over income. You're looking at putting up the prices for 5%, and then you want to balance this out over a 5-year period. Which 5-year period?
So from a finance perspective, 5-year periods could be 2.5 years before, 2.5 years in advance. So, but where we have slight difficulty is, and it's unique for this authority. So where we moved over from the PPP to ourselves, we were all placed in a position of effectively a year needed to be had for us to understand the full extent of the income. So we're some way into that, and we can see the income that's coming in. So over the 5-year period, it'll come from the 2023 will be our earliest actual figures. So the following reports will be from 2023 because that's our hard data.
Just as a follow-up, so if I understood that correctly, we're doing a 23 to 28 5-year period. I understand that in principle you could use a rolling 5-year period. I'd be slightly concerned about using rolling 5-year periods because it's kind of easy to hide numbers a little bit when you do that. So can I just confirm that we'll be using that 23 to 28 period and sticking to that 23 to 28 period for the purposes of evening out the costs and income?
I'm happy to direct reports in that same way. Yeah, that's our anticipation.
Can I just give some information before we go on, Mark? Oh, sorry. I'm just going to give some information before we go on. A number of years ago, some of the Berkshire authorities decided to put this work together. It was led by Newbury, early 20s, I think it was, something like that. And we have decided to pull out of some of that Newbury partnership, particularly for licensing. So when we say PPP, it's the Public Protection Partnership, I think it was called. It goes back a long time. So just as an explanation for those that weren't here then.
Yeah, you're right, Beth. I started it.
I was here, Pauline. Pauline, do you have a question?
Yes, I do, Beth. It's for Gina, actually. I'm pleased to see the changes of the fly tipping charges to be based on importance or of criticality of the particular occurrence. How much would they have to be to actually break even the cost of clearing up fly tipping? And how do you decide when to go down the criminal route and get people's vans crushed and all that sort of stuff, which strikes me as another alternative?
I can't give you the exact figure for breaking even on it because without finding evidence and then issuing a fixed penalty, it's very difficult to give you that. And part and parcel of the collection tends to be when the guys are out and about collecting ad hoc fly tipping as well. So they don't separate it out. So that part of it is very difficult to do. With regards to the seizing and scrapping of vehicles, that is something that we have been looking at, and that is something that we will be working towards in the future. Obviously, we do need to find somewhere to store these vehicles whilst all the inquiries are ongoing, and subsequent costs associated with that. Because we have a different contract now. We have a contract with the AA for collecting abandoned vehicles, so we would probably have to use those. So it's not off the table. It's definitely on the table, but it's something that you know, we are looking to introduce moving forward. But yes, I'd love to get some vehicles crushed. In the future. But with regards to that, like I say, it is on the table.
So I recall a few years ago that somebody who was fly tipping on the A329M got his vehicle crushed by Slough, I think it was.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
I don't know. Slough, I find that if it's on the A329M, it wouldn't have been Slough because that comes under Wokingham.
No, I think he dumped stuff on the A329M, but he also dumped stuff elsewhere, and Slough got him and dealt with him. So are there any penalties above that £1,000 at the moment?
The only penalty will be obviously taking them to court. So we would take them to court, and then the court would decide on what they would get being in court. So for fly tipping, you know, if they went to court, then it's imprisonment not exceeding 12 months or an unlimited fine. So they could get both, but that's very rare that they will do that because the judges obviously take into consideration a lot of what people's earnings are, what their jobs do, etc. And any fine that is issued in a court stays with the court. The council don't get any of that fine into our coffers, really. So as far as fixed penalty is concerned, that's why we're looking to raise it to the maximum of £1,000.
And how do you decide whether to go on fixed penalty or whether to go to court?
It's whether it's in the public interest to do so or not, because we have to take into account all the costs associated with it, and the possibility of actually getting a conviction in court. It's something that we do want to do, but obviously it's making sure that we can gather all the evidence that's required to push it through in the courts. With the fixed penalties, though, at least we know with getting the fixed penalties in, and we've issued quite a lot this year, and we are getting quite a steady stream of money coming back into the council to cover the costs of these clearances. We tend to use a fixed penalty on a first offence.
Thank you. It would be useful, Gina, just to see an idea of how it's performing in terms of income and costs at some point. But thank you very much. Useful answer.
I can give you a quick overview if you want. I mean, we've issued 72 fixed penalties so far since April, and the current amount that we've actually got back in is £13,500, which doesn't sound an awful lot, but because our rates are set at 400, which is why we're looking to increase them.
Thank you. That's good news. Thanks.
Is that it, Pauline?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Shahid and then Majid.
Thank you, Beth. And just on that, a couple of points. Just on the fees, Gina, you just mentioned you're increasing to 500 up to 1,000. Obviously, I just want to understand the rationale behind it. Obviously, we talked about 5% increase, and the other here it seems to be 25% to 150%. Just sort of thinking behind it will be helpful. I think maybe you want to answer that question before I move to the second one.
The maximum penalty that the government have introduced is £1,000, but fly tipping takes on different forms. It can be anything from one bag, a small amount of fly tipping, so a small pile, so 5 or 6 bags, up to a lorry load where somebody's driven along a lane, upended the van and driven off. So it's having that ability to fix penalty according to the amount that's been fly tipped. So like I say, we tend to use this on a first offence. So to fix penalty somebody £1,000 for one bag of rubbish, I think would be very difficult for us if they didn't pay it to get it through to court. And the judge might see it as not being appropriate for the offence that's been committed, even though the maximum is 1,000.
Okay. Regarding the cost neutral, does that apply to Appendix A as well, fees? Obviously, I understand we don't have any discretion. This is set by the government. But does it actually, the income stays with the council? That's my assumption. Just want to clarify. And if it does it actually cover our cost, or is that cost neutral as well? As we know, it is cost neutral for Appendix B, please.
With regards to the fixed penalties that we issue, all that money that comes back into the council stays within the council. Any funds that come in can only be used for environmental purposes, such as education, trying to stop people fly tipping. It wouldn't be cost neutral because, like I was explaining to Pauline as well, it's very difficult to segregate what's fly tipping and when the guys are out collecting all of the waste. So they tend to collect it. So they have a route and they will just go and collect everything. So I can't tell you, how many tons of fly tipping is collected. That's something that I would have to get from the Cleaner and Greener team.
Sorry, my question wasn't particularly about the environmental sort of area. It was generally everything under Appendix A, which covers a lot. So I just want to know, is that cost neutral as well?
I'm sorry, I've literally jumped on this meeting very last minute. I've not looked at Appendix A. Kieran, Can you help me out at all on this one?
That's okay. Thanks, Gina. I'll take this question. Councillor, the Appendix A are the statutory fees. In terms of Gina's service area, they're penalties. They're not fees. They're penalties. And you've heard from Gina how they want to make use. So there is a limit, which is a statutory limit, so they can charge £1,000 up to £1,000, and that's set as a statutory, but it's a fee. It's a penalty fee rather than it's a penalty rather than a fee. In terms of your question around Appendix A for the fees, the statutory fees that are set, we obviously don't have any ability to amend those fees, and they are set by central government. It does well appear from the context of our own report that those fees could also benefit from being increased, but we don't have that ability. There could potentially be some lobbying available from a local government association to lobby central government to increase those statutory fees, but we're outside of that, and I wouldn't expect that the statutory fees enable a full cost recovery of the service, and which is part of the reason why discretionary fees are also being increased for their own costs.
I'm not sure that answers the question which I've asked, right? I mean, when you say, my understanding is, if we say cost neutral, we get a revenue coming in and we get a cost associated with that. So intention is not to make profit out of it, right? So the revenue will equal the cost. I'm sure we will know the cost of Appendix A fees as well, whatever the services we provide. The question was that revenue we're getting from Appendix A. I understand that these are not set by us and we don't have any discretion. That revenue, does that actually cover our cost or not? Or are we having to contribute at a local level towards the cost to actually make it, to equal it? So that was my question.
If it's in regard to fly tipping, it doesn't cover all of the costs for fly tipping, no. The fly tipping, within the borough is very large, and it will depend on what evidence we find for us to be able to then issue a fixed penalty or prosecute. we don't always find evidence in fly tipping. So, you know, to answer your question, I hope it answered your question, it won't cover what we get in fixed penalty payments, won't cover the cost of actually removing all of the fly tipping.
Thanks, Gina, and Councillor Cheed, in the same way that the Appendix A fees, the actual fees, won't cover the costs involved of processing licensing application. They were set around 2003. We're a good couple of decades since then, so they won't necessarily cover it at the same point that they were originally set. It would be useful to have some lobbying of central government to see if the fees could be reviewed in terms of the statutory fees, but that's not the position that we're in at the moment, as well as a number of other councils are not in that same position.
Yeah, sorry, just to come back on. Yeah, thank you for that. I think that is is a more important question which raised by Rachel earlier on as well, and Pauline. I remember this question being asked last year as well, and that it will really be useful to have the cost of these. Otherwise, we're talking about the revenue, but we don't understand how much the service is costing us. And actually, you know, if you're going to look at holistically, it's not possible to do that. So can we actually make a point that next time we look at this report, we will have cost associated with that? I understand we may not have 100% accurate, but whatever we can, I'm sure we got figures in our system which tell us what the actual cost was last year on each of these different categories. I think it would be useful to have at least an understanding of what they are. I understand they may not be 100%, but at least if we can get 90% accuracy, that would be a really good start. I really find it very difficult to know whether it's a cost neutral when we don't have the full picture.
Thanks, Shahid. Majid.
My question is related to this 5% increase. On page 26, there is a description about Hackney carriage and private hire. Generally, there are 4 kinds of cars, taxis, Hackney carriage, then private, then executive car, then school transport. So is this 5% increase is for all these 4, 5? Because there are only 2 mentioned here.
Yeah, it's a 5% increase on all fees,
including school transport.
Yes, including school transport.
Only during when schools are open. If you evaluate their income, it's quite low as compared to Hackney carriage or private hire or executive car. So is it fair to deal with all 4 or 5 kinds with same amount, 5% increase?
It is. So there are areas in terms of school transport within our Hackney carriage and private hire licensing policy, where those drivers benefit in other areas. So at the moment they have the ability to license a quite an old vehicle. They also have the ability to not undertake a knowledge test for the area because they're working just the school runs. So whilst that's a fee set, there's effectively trade-offs in other areas where the council applies a discretion around the age of the vehicles for school vehicles and the fact that they don't have to go through a knowledge test to be a licensed driver just for schools.
And second question is that on page 11 and then on page 12, there is a table about Bracknell, Reading and other borough councils and their fees as well. but it doesn't state how much increase these boroughs had in their fees. It's just a general description. I don't know about others, but as far as Reading Borough is concerned, there was no increase in last 2 years. And if I calculate here, in 3 years, total increase is 21%. Previous two and this one, which you are recommending 5 years. So I don't know, inflation was increased 21%.
Correct. The report doesn't deal with the increases, but what it does deal with is the bottom line costs. So the actual fees that they're charging. So the tables that show are the actual fees that are being charged this year and how Woking compares to that, which is aligned. These fees are aligned. I appreciate there's been an increase in fees, but those fees are. The increase in fees have been necessary as our budgets have shown within the analysis of the issues.
And last question, when you finalize this increase, like whatever it is, 10% or 5%, are those who will be affected, their representatives, they are consulted or not?
So the governance. The governance arrangements are through this committee, through Licensing and Appeals Committee, and then through the executive. So if there is to be a challenge from any trade, it's through this governance forum. What we also have to do is, if there's an increase in terms of, I think it's vehicles, which would happen. We issue a notice in the newspaper, and that carries a consultation. But that's the only area that carries a consultation. The main governance is this committee.
Rob.
I'm afraid my question is probably going back to Gina, which, if she's still there. If not, there we go. If I understood you correctly, Gina, you said that we'd issued 72 penalty notices, which were at the original price of £400 each, as I understand it. That's where my maths went wrong. Perhaps you could explain to me what those were then.
Yeah, we've issued 400 fixed penalties. If you bear with me, I will give you a lowdown on what it was that we issued. Bear with me 2 seconds. It's variance, because obviously we don't just issue for fixed penalties for fly tipping. We have other fixed penalties that we issue. So we've issued for the public space protection order. So these were for your car meets and the people misbehaving at those. So we've managed to track them down and trace them and issue them with fixed penalties. So the 72 fixed penalties will range from littering, dog fouling, duty of care, the PSPO, fly tipping, and I'm just trying to think, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yeah, that's what it's been over the year. So it's not just the fly tipping. The 72 do include fixed penalties for all of the things I've just mentioned. And that varies up from 400 to 300 to 200. So that's what we've issued this year.
Yeah, fine, thanks for clarifying that. Just the final bit then. So how many fixed penalty notices for fly tipping specifically have we issued?
We have issued... Why is it when you click off of it, you can never click back on it again? Fly tipping, we've issued 27.
Mark.
Thank you. I hate to labour the point back on fly tipping. It's a blight on our community. So I don't have any issue with increasing the fees and charges in that area. I wish we could increase them more. One thing that slightly worried me, I think, is something Gina said, that we can't actually track the tonnage that's specifically fly tipping because of the way that we collect it. So if we're not able to collect data on the amount of tonnage, are we losing out on the opportunity of being able to go through specifically fly tip rubbish for intelligence as to who will have dumped it to enable us? Are we losing out on the ability to issue more fixed penalty notices?
No, what happens is when a fly tip is reported, it comes through to my team. And if from what has been fly tipped, if we feel that there will be evidence, then we will go out. With regard to fly tipping in general, fly tipping can be anything from a fridge, a sofa, anything like that. And, you know, to be perfectly honest with you, we're not going to find any evidence with a fridge. So we know from obviously years of experience what the likelihood is of finding evidence. So we will go out and investigate all of the ones that we feel that we're going to find evidence in, or you know, that we've got a possibility of maybe having a witness that we can follow up on. But generally with fly tipping, like I say, it can be anything from, like I say, a fridge upwards.
Thank you. And you'd be surprised what information you can get from a fridge. I know that in
Sorry, it keeps cutting out. I can't hear you very well.
I'm not sure. Is that better?
Yes, better.
It's amazing how much information you can glean from a fridge. I know as in Bracknell, we were able to track down the owner of a fridge from the serial number and who it had been registered to. So there's always information out there. But thank you for the answer. My second question, I understand about the fees and charges and the Appendix A and obviously the Appendix B. I hear the comments from my colleagues around the room. I mean, 5% seems to be what I'm hearing from other places as well. Because of the current economic climate we all face ourselves in. Home to school transport is a fairly interesting one because we'll end up paying for that ourselves to increase costs of the home to school transport provision. So hopefully that's been baked into the budget projections for and cost projections for those areas as well. I have a more general question about the PPP itself, having been in one of the other three members of that and voted for its creation. And I know how much money it saved us at the time and over the course of its operation. So I'd like to understand when we will have a view of how much, if anything, pulling out of the Public Protection Partnership has cost the authority. That doesn't need to be answered now, but I'm hearing questions that we have gaps in some of our data and understanding. But I would like to get a view about when we can get an update on what impact financially it's had to the authority, especially when we start to see sort of the fees and income or the cost of running a service increase. It doesn't need to be answered completely today. You can come back to me, but I think it's an important topic for a review.
It's certainly an interesting area to review. I think I would have to come back to you in terms of how we'd assess that.
Are there any other questions? No? Thank you. Right, can we have a show of hands, please, to accept the charges as set out in the report? Thank you. Any against? Abstentions? Thank you. Thank you very much. Just out of interest, last week a colleague of mine phoned me and said there's 15 bags of rubbish been dumped opposite the Co-op on Woodlands Avenue, and I called and reported it as fly tipping. It was the litter picking group. You can't win them all, can you?